Welcome to Firefighting Today, the weekly video roundtable discussion show where we discuss all things fire service related. Firefighting Today is a production of PeteLamb.com. And now your host, Chief Peter Lamb.
Hello and welcome. Firefighting Today, the weekly roundtable show. We're talking about garden apartments tonight. We've got a pretty good panel assembled for you. We've got a lot of stuff that we're ready to do for you. Just a couple of quick housekeeping things before we get too carried away. And that is, first and foremost, schedule. Some of you don't listen all the way through, so I'll say it at the end as well. But scheduling is looks like this. It is December 3rd. There will be a show on the 10th, and then we will probably take a break until after the new year. So there will be a show on the 10th, and then we'll probably take the break until after the new year. So if you are watching us live on YouTube, feel free to jump in on the live chat. We've got the live chat set up. We can monitor that. Feel free to use that. If you're watching us on one of the websites and you don't have the live chat, but you have Twitter, feel free to use Twitter, and we can also communicate with you and get your questions right into the chat room and be able to do that. So, just before we get started introducing the panel, it is December 3rd. As the whole country, the whole fire service and international fire service realizes one of the most tragic firefighter losses of life was in Worcester, Massachusetts on December 3rd, 1999. I would be remiss if I started this show and did not mention that. I would direct you, if you are interested in that fire or want a perspective on that fire, feel free to listen to the podcast that was put out today. The firefighter training podcast was actually on the Worcester incident. So I would be remiss if I didn't say that. Let's introduce the panel and get going for the evening. Chief Hall, say hello.
Good evening, everyone. My name's Charlie Hall. 41 years fire service. I'm a retired chief officer here in West Warwick, Rhode Island. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Charlie. And Chief Pernesti, say hello.
Hello, everybody. I'm Joe Pernesti. I'm with the City of Elyria, Ohio Fire Department in Northern Ohio. I'm an assistant chief shift commander, and thank you for having me and your podcast today. I highly recommend to everybody.
Oh, thank
you. Great thing. Great job.
Thank you, Chief. I appreciate that. Chief Starnes, say hello.
Good evening, Chief. Joe Starnes, Kill the Fire Sergeant, Oak Grove Volunteer Fire Department. Glad to be here. Thank you very much for having me, and I'll get back in the corner.
All right. Chief Cagno, say hello.
Hello, everyone. Chief John Cagno, retired battalion chief out of North Providence and founder of Lead It. And thanks for having me again, Pete. And if anybody gets a chance, your viewing audience, I highly recommend the podcast on the Worcester fire. It's sobering and informative.
Thanks, John. Lane, Chief Lane Woolery, say hello.
Good evening, everybody. Lane Woolery, battalion chief at San Diego Fire Rescue, where we're just under the beginning of a big red flag warning here in California.
Yes, and I do see you're in uniform, Lane. So if you have to escape, you're certainly just bail out and do what you got to do. So we'll hopefully keep you for the session, but we'll see where it goes. And last but certainly not least, Chief Warren Whitley.
No, it didn't. Now it did.
There you go.
Hi, Warren Whitley, retired assistant chief from Prince William County, Virginia, relaxing on my front porch in North Carolina.
Nothing wrong with that. You got to love it. You got to love it. So questions, if you're watching us live, if you have questions or what have you, we're going to try to talk about garden apartments, and we are going to hopefully give you some tips, some things to be of concern, maybe, what have you. We're actually going to look at a case history I'm going to work through a case history first. That's where we're going to start, and then we'll take it from there. So kind of just a very generic definition about what are we talking about. So when we say a garden apartment, it may be set off the road a little bit. It's quote unquote surrounded by grass instead of asphalt. It can be 2, 3, 4 stories in height. Generally, after 4 stories, you're talking about something else, probably really. Very, very high propensity to have void space fires. Most all of these have balconies, and in the case history that I'm going to look at, balconies became clearly a concern. So if I've got a multi-unit apartment building, people have to park somewhere. So you start parking somewhere, we get access issues. You may not be able to get around all sides. Sometimes these are built in a circle, and the inner core of that circle might be grass. It may not be suitable for apparatus and so forth. And the fact is, it is a residential structure. So there's an obvious life hazard there that has to be considered, certainly. So this is kind of what it looks like. You know, in the lower left side, we're talking about stacked kitchens. So obviously, if you stack kitchens and bathrooms, that leads to a common stacked pipe chase that's in there. It can be metal studs, wooden studs. Obviously, all of this depends on when the building was built. There can be firewall separations. As we know, by definition, a firewall goes through the roof and extends out through the front and back of the building. We sometimes call rated walls, if you will, firewalls, and that's not always the case. There is a very good possibility of these fires will extend horizontally through the exterior, horizontally and vertically on the exterior of the building. And once it gets into a common attic space, it is not uncommon to take the roof right off of these buildings. The last other issue that we talk about is the basement and lower levels can sometimes be storage areas. They can be storage caged in areas where each apartment has its own storage unit. It can be the laundry facilities in some cases. There's probably a higher fire load, and there's probably some ingress and egress issues. Ingress for us, certainly. So let's take a look at a fire. I'm going to walk you through a fire. I was at this fire not as a firefighter, as a spectator. And we'll kind of just tell you what we saw, what I saw, and we'll see if there's any building construction features that might be relevant. So we'll take it from a distance. Obviously, you see the garden apartment that we talk about. There's a series of buildings. Usually in these places, there's a series of buildings. We're obviously looking at this back building. This is quite an older fire. This goes back probably into the 80s, but I think the story is the same. And you are somewhere about 15 to 18 minutes, 15 to 20 minutes into this fire right now. So I'm going to take you in a little closer, obviously, but you could say, you know, it's lighter colored smoke. There's a little bit of a wind condition. You know, we see what's going on there. There are some indicators here that might tell you something. So one of the things that you can get in trouble with these types of buildings, and particularly as you look at this building, you can see right over the roof of that apparatus, there is a story right there, or at least a half story. So is this a 3-story building, or is it 2 with a basement? You know, make sure everybody on the fire ground knows what you're talking about here, because it's important. The other thing is that in the absence of a heating system running, you know, having smoke coming out of that chimney might indicate that we've got a lower floor. We may have something in that basement area or that lower level that we're talking about. So that certainly could be one of the considerations. You look at the conditions over here, you can see some smoke on the balcony, not an awful lot. You look at the second floor, you know, curtains hanging in the windows. There's not a lot going on. It appears to be cleared up. I think that one of the interesting things that struck me, I really didn't figure it out, that inside that burn mark on that building is, you could certainly think that might be an interior petition fire. You could think that would be something that got out of hand. And the reality is that that burn mark is actually a shrub. That shrub went up and burned the side of the building. It was drop fire that got into a decorative shrubbery around the outside of the building, and that's what caused that to flare up. So let's take a look. I'm going to, for the sake of discussion, to keep us, this narrow side of the building, I'm going to say is the A side, because we're going to make some references here, and fire attack and everything took place through this A side. There was an attempt to ventilate the roof, and in these garden apartments, this is a stacked common stairway. So there is a stairway going down. There's a little balcony there. You'll see in a minute, a little bit clearer. And you obviously see the scorch marks where you had fire blowing out of this lower level. There was overlapping fire when the companies arrived here. So that certainly makes a difference. Again, we talked about access issues. You got vehicles parked here. I think that I cut the picture off a little bit. I'm sorry. There's a feeder line there that's trying to get in the way, but you got parked vehicles where they shouldn't be, and so on and so forth. So there you see what the fire was on the lowest level of this. Things, again, we're 20 minutes into it. It appears to be, knocked down at this point. Still not completely out by any stretch of the imagination. And incidentally, as I said, I'm the photographer here, so these pictures are in sequence, just to point that out. So again, there's not much going on. You see that balcony. So if you went in that lower level, you went down to the right, you would be in a laundry room. You'd be in that area, storage room, laundry room. You see that there's some smoke hanging around on the second floor on that landing. You get an idea of the way this building's constructed. So you have, a left and a right side, if you will. Again, we're still looking at the A side of the building. You see the obstruction of those cars in the way, and it was certainly a hassle for anybody to deal with. Now, just get a sense here. You got the conditions right there. And now you've got the conditions here. So this job is not over. This fire is not over by any stretch of the imagination, and they're reassembling crews to go back into this situation. Again, you got crews on all floors at this point, trying to do what they can. You see the extent of the overlapping fire and everything that was going on in that area. I want you to pay attention in this next one. There seems to be some discussion and a flurry of activity. It's a little difficult to see, but can you see that everybody is looking at, appears to be wisps of smoke coming out from under the balcony. These balconies are built in such a way that they're cantilevered. The floor joists that run across actually extend out into that balcony area. And you see people looking at, now, the A side, you are on side B, Bravo. The A side is off to my right. So we just kind of walked around the corner. So the A side is to the right where we just looked. And now we're investigating some whiffs of smoke, I would say, in the first apartment at the AB corner. I don't know. As we look at this, I guess my question is are things getting any better here? Let's see if we can get that. Yeah. So now we start to get a sense of common spaces. We start to get a sense. Remember that the fire was on the lowest level. That was the origin of the fire, was on that first floor or basement level, whatever it is you want to call it. And we now have the entire B side, the floor 2 balcony, floor 1 to floor 2 balcony is the entire B side running up the length of the building. Again, you have people on the fire escape, on the balconies, and you look at the underside of it and see what's going on there. You still have an obvious smoke condition, and they literally are upstairs. They're literally upstairs, and they're saying there's nothing in this apartment. They see nothing in that apartment where they are, but there's clearly something going on underneath them. And that's literally what this conversation is about. Is, you know, I've checked everything. Again, this is before the time of thermal imaging cameras and all of that. I've checked everything. There's nothing going on here. Again, look underneath, look at those first floor windows and that first floor underside of the balcony, and not everything becomes as obvious as you would want it to be. So now he's moved over into a hallway space, a different room, and again, nothing going on, but you see the smoke under that right-hand side balcony still. Now, you see you've got a little bit of smoke, not quite so much under the balcony, but what's going on floor 3 here? You're starting to see something appear up on floor 3. Again, we're still in the first row of apartments on B Bravo, close to the A side of the building. Somewhere in the next couple of minutes, I had stood back a distance from this building in roughly this perspective. That's actually a bit of a zoom lens. And I thought I saw something over the top of the roof that I wanted to go take a look at. So I'm talking about the Delta side near Charlie. That is the Delta side of the building within a minute of that last photograph. If that gives you some sense of what's going on here and how much we've had fire travel from where it was. You'll just watch this. You just watch this develop pretty quickly. Again, you see where fire has come from is again under these balcony areas. It's clearly into the hallways and so forth. You know, smoke color, we start to talk about and look. Again, you see windows that are perfectly clear. Some windows are perfectly fine, and it doesn't seem like there's a significant problem there. We got a couple of fire behavior guys on the panel, and this is all in the matter of, you know, minutes. This is probably, I don't know, maybe 3 minutes from the time I got around to the Delta side to now. And they've got a very significant hostile fire event that took place in that window. There was an interior crew on that floor at that time. They had an 1 3/4 inch line, and they were overtaken with that line. Again, now you are at the last apartment on Delta near C. If you went around that corner, you would be on the C side. So they get a line in place. They start doing a fire attack. After that crew got driven down the hallway a little bit, they made another whack at that. Again, I think you see the potential here for exterior spread. These apartments are noted. Everything is stacked as we showed in that first diagram. So you're now in this wood frame building going to have exterior fire travel. Again, interestingly enough, if you had a crew on that first floor looking at the, I mean, you got the lampshade on the first floor, not even singed soot. There's no heat down there whatsoever. But you certainly have fires in void spaces all the way through this building. What they're doing here is knocking down the overlapping fire. You see that some fire, once again, has dropped down into some shrubs or whatever. They're trying to get that line up and under the soffit so that they can stop that overlapping fire. There is a crew interior at this point. And remember, some 20 or 30 years ago, there was never a choice where you would ever put that water in the window while there was a crew inside. So, you know, I'm not talking about how the fire was fought. I'm talking about the peculiarities of construction here. And that's what they're doing there. And again, you see the conditions here are first floor conditions are perfect. But after that, it's going pretty good in the upper areas. So that's where I wanted to go. Questions or comments from the panel first, and then we'll see if there's anything going on in the chat room. Any comments, questions, or anything about what you saw as it related to those fires? Yes, Chief Lane, go ahead.
You know, as I'm watching some of those pictures there, it was very reminiscent to me of the 30 Dowling Circle, the Mark Falkenhayn tragedy. You know, where it was nothing showing, not much going on, then all of a sudden it got bad, you know, somewhere else where nobody was really expecting that to happen.
Right, and it becomes a resource game here, right? If you don't have, you know, well, obviously I got to check every void space on every floor. Well, you know what? That doesn't really, you know, that's not as easily done as it is said, certainly. So yeah, that's a good comment. No question. We should reference that incident because folks should know about that for sure. Anybody else on the panel? Anything else? Yeah, Warren, please.
Well, Joe and I both typed in the room that there's lots of doors and windows open. And if you really want to find a fire, that's what you do.
Yeah, and I don't dispute that, guys. But again, I think that the time, you know, I just did a podcast, and if I knew then what I knew now, you know, I'm not sure that they did anything different than a standard fire attack. And based on what they had there's no question that there was a lot of air movement available from a variety of sources. No question at all.
We see the you know, they did as they were trained to do back then, but unfortunately that's how you find the fire in those cases, is it finally gets air and gets going.
Right.
It's interesting to me, it looked like underneath the balcony is that they actually had coverings over the floor joists, you know, so it was enclosed.
That is true. That is exactly true. There was a light sheeting over there under those, and they were in fact enclosed. And I think, you know, again, I wasn't fighting this fire. I was a spectator, but as I watched it develop, clearly that first floor fire, the fire that started on first floor, penetrated that ceiling and just went sideways pretty quickly, and then ultimately front to back of the building it started to travel as well. So
was that a walkout in the back, Chief?
It looked exactly as the A side. It was that same center hallway, 2 stairways, balcony, so forth. It was the exact mirror of what you saw there.
All right.
Anybody else from the panel? Questions, comments, or Chief Cagno?
Yeah, it looks like, you know, they had the usual excitement in the beginning. They did some good work getting, you know, the heavy fire knocked down, and then it probably became a loss of resource problem, and they couldn't get in there and open up the building and check the void spaces to find out where that fire was traveling. And this is the classic with these type of structures. Obviously, there's horizontal spread, vertical spread is a huge problem if you're resource deficient.
Yeah, there clearly was a resource game here. There's no question they did not have the resources to be able to do it. The other factor, which is kind of a learning tip for some of the viewers that are listening, the first 2 companies, when they went down that stairwell, it tumbled a little bit. They kind of fell over one another, and it was for the only reason is they tripped over about 6 dry chemical fire extinguishers. So here's the lesson here, is that this building had what's called a local fire alarm. That is, it sounds the alarm. That was accordance to the Rhode Island code. You could have a local fire alarm. It got the people out of the building, but it didn't call anybody. So the alarm goes off, the alarm sounds, it does what it's supposed to do. It's, as I said, 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And so the detection was, to answer your question, Joe, no, not a delayed discovery. They discovered it pretty quick. The alarm sounded. But then people, because no fire apparatus is responding, people are putting it out with extinguishers. The other interesting thing is the first alarm assignment to this building was an entire mutual aid first alarm. The community where the building is had a major working fire themselves. So you had the first two crew had never been in this building, never answered medicals there, never had any, you know, again, they were in their blind. But again, I think it represents a fire again, and I'm not here to talk about tactics or talk about how anybody else fought their fire, but I thought that the smoke travel, this is one that I use a lot to talk about because the smoke travel and the construction features here, I think there are lessons that are able to be learned by all, certainly. So we do have some folks in the chat room. Chat room folks, if you have questions about what you saw or you want to dive into this discussion, if you've had an experience with a garden apartment, feel free. So Chief Hall, go ahead.
How much of the first arriving apparatus are dedicated to search for occupants as opposed to advancing lines of suppression?
You know, I would tell you, Chief, and again, I was there a little bit late on the gun. At mid-afternoon, I have to tell you that most of that first alarm assignment was on fire suppression. I don't think there was a massive search done. I think there was a little bit later in the game as they got fire. Again, you know, picture that mouth of fire they had lapping up the side of the building. I think it was fire attack to fight your way in, quite frankly. But again, I wasn't there for that first few minutes. But my guess now, again, great point, Chief, is and that's this: that fire at 2 o'clock in the morning. There's nobody fighting that fire because everybody's searching, I'm guessing, you know?
Were there any occupant injuries or fatalities?
No, absolutely no fatalities in that fire. And I think there was a couple of firefighters transported for, you know, exhaustion or whatever. It was a pretty good day. It was not an overheated day. It was not a freezing day. It was kind of just an average day, maybe 40s.
Well, I noticed the lack of foliage, leaves on the trees and such. I figured it was late fall, winter time.
Yeah. So, but it wasn't super cold. I can tell you that because I don't go to fires when it's cold. That was a rule I had. So I try not to do that. So, that's what was going on. Joe Stantz, what do you got?
I was going to ask just questions. Did you have smoke in the hallway, the stairwell up to the apartment access floor to floor?
Yes, there was smoke in that common hallway that you saw on that balcony. Let me see if I can.
I thought I heard you say that, and you had that one firefighter hanging out the window that one shot.
Yeah, and he had no smoke in the apartment. Let me see if so. This may tell the story. I don't know. Let me try it.
So if you were going to own the stairwell to provide your exit path for the egress path for the occupants, was that a doable thing there? Were they trying to do that?
Yeah, I think they certainly were. So again, you see that this is the lower level, and you had similar conditions earlier on up on that upper level on that stairway landing. Now there was a door a few feet ahead of you. There was a door that would have enclosed that hallway, yeah, I think there certainly was smoke in some hallways. And then those guys with the 1 3/4 line, when they fought their way down that hallway. They determined that the source of the flash there, and that's something we hinted about earlier, was a fiberglass shower enclosure. So that's what ultimately flashed and came out of those windows on the Delta side, like you saw it. I mean, it flashed the whole room, obviously, but the source of the trouble there. And so again, you know, what does that say in real life? That says pipe chase, right? That's what that says. That says, getting in there. Again, no thermal images at this point in time. That's not something we had access to or what have you. I think. Again, I think it was a standard deal. So that's.
You know, I would hate that. I've got so dependent on it now. I don't even know how to know that I would trust myself without them now.
Yeah, I mean, technology has changed, but I mean, I think in, at the time and place that you were, there was, Murphy came to this fire. There's no question. You know what I mean? The certainly a good head start on the fire. I think it's something I say to the listeners all the time, and that's this: just because the box came in right now or the alarm came in right now, don't think that's when the fire started. Sometimes we get that mindset. Oh, geez, we just got a call. Yeah, that doesn't really mean a whole lot. Go ahead, Joe.
What I was going to say, Chief, is some of my training in the early days, we would actually open it up just to find it. If we had a fire we couldn't find because we didn't have ticks, we would actually open it up to see where it burned.
I think that's standard fire attack. That's been going on for years and years and years. That's how we did it. Now the problem is, over some of those years when we opened it up, we created, a hostile event.
It's kind of like going to a backyard and open up the fence and find out the dog was a lot meaner and bigger than we thought.
Yeah, that's. I would say that's a good analogy. Yeah, that's a good analogy. Chief Pernesti, you've been quiet here. What do you got? What do you got to say here, Chief? Chief, you're muted still, or you got a mic problem?
Got it.
There you go.
No problem. I guess my thing is that what I like about this education here is that even in 2017, prize a younger officer or a younger command officer got it licked. It's just so many things that you have to consider. I think we're probably better at it now, but forecasting, that might have been a lesson. Forecasting where the fire was going to be in 10 minutes, 15 minutes, or 20 minutes. But they got water on the fire, the initial, and maybe I'm a little confused. Did they get water on the fire quickly on the original? Knock it quick?
Yeah, I would say that they did, Chief. And let me see if I can go back to, I would say here, you're 15 minutes into this. So I would say yes, Chief. I mean, they had overlapping fire on the exterior of the building. They had fire in the downstairs in the area. Yeah, absolutely. I think the first alarm was the first. Well, and I think in some cases that may have been part of the problem. Is the first alarm beat themselves up pretty good, and needed to take a breather for a second because they just didn't have the resources initially to be able to do what they had to do. But yeah, I'm very comfortable that they did. They knocked down a lot of fire. No question. No question.
Keith, one more thing. Two things really. Those guys up on the roof, and it doesn't look like there is any attic space. Very little. That you just typical. They'll have that with that flat roof. They'll have no space. You'll have the, and then the third floor is the upper floor apartment ceiling.
Yeah, so there was not a significant attic space whatsoever. That's a great catch. They were up there to vent. I think they cut a small hole. I'm not sure it amounted to anything, but they did have, in fact, yeah, I can't really, I'm looking at the photo here. You can see it. They did get a small hole in there. They were up there working with saws. But that was, again, there was no attic space to be had here. So, and you notice that you really didn't have fire, that's a good point, Chief, is that you get fire travel in these attics, like you read about, faster than a race car. But, so I think that there was no fire travel in this attic. It was probably a 1 to 2 foot space only. I'm going to go to Chief Hall first, and then it's John and Joe. So Chief Hall.
Observing that last slide, Chief, I noticed several things. First and importantly, from the safety aspect, I noticed two aerials to the roof. The second thing I noticed was the two individuals that were on the roof looked like they had perhaps just completed a task or about to start a task. But the thing that jumped out at me was, number one, the color of the smoke told me that there's been a significant amount of water put on this fire. And number two, the heat level must have dropped because that smoke was not pushing at all. So it looked, I believe it was Chief Pronesti said about getting the water on the fire. It looked like they had made what appeared to be, at least initially, a pretty good stop. And then, of course, with the void spaces and such, that's when it hit the fan. Initially, like they had a good knockdown.
You're absolutely correct, Chief. That your read is right. So those guys had just finished. When I got there, I heard saws running. The saws were not running shortly thereafter, and they did have an aerial on both sides of that roof, which is a great practice if you can do it. And again, this building was such that you really had the full length of the building, if you will. You know, you get tangled up on length and width, but you had the full length of the building. So those two aerials were close. They were on side B and D, Bravo and Delta, and close to the A side. So you're exactly right, Chief. They did get some water on that fire pretty quick. Chief Cagno, I think, had something.
Yeah, Chief Pronesti noted that obviously there wasn't a big cockloft space. But you know, when you look at this particular type of building, being platform, and you know, they made a significant knockdown early on in the fire. But if you go through the series of photographs, you can see the indicators that fire is traveling in numerous concealed spaces at different ends of the building. So, you know, obviously they didn't have the manpower. You know, they were resource deficient early on. I think a mistake a lot of chiefs or young chiefs make is that instead of calling in like truck companies, you know, in New England, or I shouldn't say New England, but in Rhode Island in particular, you know, we special call engine companies to do truck work most of the time because there's not many ladder companies. But, you know, you got to bring in the right resources in these large buildings when you know you got the potential of void space fire or the travel of fire in void spaces as a potential. But they had some things in their favor, and that being that they didn't have the usual cockloft space. But there was clearly indicators, I think, that the fire was traveling.
Yeah, and again, you know, the other blessing they had, and we talked about it, you know, it's 2 or 3 in the afternoon. It's a mid-afternoon fire. If you had to conduct searches, you would not have had the aggressiveness of the attack on the fire, and you certainly would have had more travel than I think than we saw there. This building was habitable. Obviously, they lost a number of apartments, but there were people that were able to, you know, that building was not torn down when the fire department left. That wasn't the case. Joe Stearns, you had some comment or question.
Well, I was going to say, one of the things we follow Trap to in volunteers is we put everybody to work breathing air. And at the 16 or 17 minute mark of once they went on air, we have no crew ready on deck. And one of the things I learned from Chief Brunacini was to make sure that I always had an on deck crew ready to replace my working crew with a full bottle of air. And we would have to order resources and get them in state. That's the reason he was such a big advocate of staging. You ordered resources and got them in staging, so for that, if you hit that concealed fire at 16 or 17, 18 minute fire, you had resources to go on and continue the firefight.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a mark. You know, Chief Pronesti was talking about coaching a young officer is understand that at 18 minutes, you know, everybody's running out of air at the same time. What's your plan? You know, and at 25 minutes, everybody's at the canteen truck having a cup of coffee. So, you know, that's something else. You know, you've got to manage it. I will say that this was unique for a couple of reasons. I told you that this department that arrived, it was not their fire. they were at a mutual aid because the mutual aid department was at a major fire. So who's your next person you would call? Your most common mutual aid was already tied up at another fire, so you would have had delayed alarms, and it was clearly a resource game, I think, was the answer here. And again, I think they did the best they could under the conditions that they had. Folks in the chat room, quiet group out there tonight. Ken, you got anything? There's a bunch of folks out there, so if you've got something, please feel free to chime in. Warren, you said you may have a couple of other visuals that you might be able to help us out with.
Yes. I'm not sure why mine takes so long to come off of mute, but yeah, I do. Hold on a sec.
All right.
Share screen. I'm sharing. And we're sharing. Can you see that?
I can. Side A upon arrival, it says.
Right. And this was a garden apartment. And again, it had some of the usual problems that were associated with this style of construction. Side Charlie was inaccessible except with ground ladders. There was no way to get any vehicles around back. There was a delayed alarm because this was first due in one of our mutual aid companies that's surrounded by the county, but they were already out on another call. So the second due engine was the first arriving. And this is what they found when they got there. This one does have a common attic on both sides.
Okay, yeah.
And open stairwell, which is pretty common construction in our county.
Yeah. Again, that's a good photo of about some of the things we talked about, and that is, again, you got that row of cars that's parked right up there, stretching hand lines in between vehicles is a pain in the neck. So where am I, on the Charlie side now?
Yes.
Okay. Oh, that's why it says side Charlie. Yeah, I get it.
It's a clue.
Yeah, I'm sharp like that.
Yeah, so you can see, and this is actually one of the better access garden apartments we have because it's reasonably flat. There's several up there that go in, they're right next to a drop off. So you may have 20 feet out from the building and then it's just a steep drop off, which really complicates matters.
Absolutely.
I forget how many rescues, but they did make several rescues from this fire, even though it was a daytime fire. And of course, Mr. Murphy showed up and it kept going.
Yep. Yep. And that's all roof area is what it looks like there, right?
Yep. All right. Cool.
Yeah, no, very good. Question from the chat room from Ethan, and I'd like to hear some folks on the panel give me some feedback on this. So Ethan asked the question: having multiple chief officers on scene, what would you do with them? Where would you deploy multiple chief officers? How would you divide this fire ground on a garden apartment? Let's see what we got for opinions. Chief Hall.
Something of that size, you've immediately got the sector off, and you've got to create sector commands. Have a set of eyes on side 3 or side Charlie, as you call it. But in an operation that big, it's important to sector it off and have maintain incident commander has to maintain his or her span of control using the sector area commanders. That's the way I would handle something like that if I was running that job.
So you're saying front and back. Somebody's on A, and you said you were assigning somebody to the Charlie side.
At very least, and perhaps if I needed to assign somebody to the Delta side or the Bravo side, I'm going to utilize my chief officers to the best of my ability. Have them be my eyes and ears and get back to me, maintaining my span of control at all times.
Okay, Chief Pernesti, comment.
Obviously, the backside where you can't see, but I'll tell you where. Chief officer is you're dealing with 4 floor. You want to have a command officer in the middle of those 4 individual boxes per se, like an operations guy. you're going to have crews operating in a single apartment. They're going to be focused on that apartment. Up communications, because if I got a guy on that fire floor and officer that can narrow all the information to me, a lot simpler. So if I can get a commander level officer up to the fire floor or the building to be narrow down the communications and take some pressure off of the company officers, that's what I do.
Yeah, I certainly think that's valid. I also think that a couple of other chief officers to create a command staff, you certainly need somebody that's going to handle, it's prudent in this case. Why don't you get a bunch of rescues here right now? Why don't you get a bunch of ambulances here right now? Because you're anticipating that you're going to have a civilian problem when you have a high life hazard like that. You may need a staging officer. You may need some of those. If we're all talking about hydrogen areas, we got viewers and listeners that are non-hydrogen areas. You better darn quick get a water supply officer out there to do that. So I think you would need a pretty good command staff. Chief Ernesti talking about putting an ops chief on a floor is a great play. It's you're narrowing, because again, you got so many firefighters. Think about if you had to do this, you're forcing doors. I certainly would also get somebody, I don't know who that is, but I'd get somebody, try to get somebody from management of this apartment complex. How many people are in here? Who are they? Can you tell me who lives in what apartment? Start trying to run down. It's the tertiary or fourth search coming down. When you're trying to figure out who's not home, who's unaccounted for, or whatever, that becomes a real ugly deal. So certainly that's there. Anybody else got what the command staff looks like? Joe Starnes, and then I'll go to John.
Well, I'm a big advocate of a plans officer, Chief. It does a lot of what you just said. I give the plans officer all my future work.
Right.
I want him one bottle change out, and what's going to happen, and just make sure that he takes care of the future work. We call it now, next, future, past, and I want a plans officer to take care of that for me. Make it, and then the situational status usually takes two people. That's that place where we're looking for occupants, or we're working with contractors, or we're working with the ability to locate someone or something that we're trying to find. So, and then what's actually on fire. And I'm a big advocate of not putting crews in the exhaust path of the fire. The fire burns hot to cold, so I'm gonna more than likely be on the directional side, and it's the air intake of that fire if I can. I'll keep a situational status person, but I probably won't have a division working in that area.
Yep.
So anyway, that's just common thoughts.
Yep. No, that's what we're talking about. Chief Cagno, you had a comment.
Yeah, if you can't get enough chief officers on scene early enough, you can always delegate one of the company officers on that floor to basically do the ops work if you got multiple companies working. But the other thing that I think we need to think about is down the road, we're going to have a lot of problems. We need a lot of logistical support in fires, especially like the one that Chief Warren put up. You got a large complex. You got a lot of people that are going to be displaced. You got bought up companies that you're going to need to come in. This becomes an extensive long-term operation requiring a lot of outside resources. So you need the chiefs to handle that. The other thing I like to note is that, we talked about terrain problems. It seems like typically they stick these complexes on just that uneven, severe drop-offs in the rears of the structures. And then in New England, we have our problems where the picture's different in the summer and the winter. Winter months, you got heavy snowfall. Now where you used to be able to maybe get access, they got snow piled up there, apparatus can't get in. You're climbing steep grades just to get up to throw ground ladders and access, the building. So, as a multitude of problems for us, any department that's arriving manpower deficient. It's like a high-rise building fire when you think about it.
Yeah, certainly a good choice. So I think, the admin work, as John said, and Joe with the planning officer, the admin work begins when this thing begins to get knocked down, because it does become a resource game at that point. The other thing is that it depends what kind of area, socioeconomic area you have. I can remember a fire I had, same sort of thing, garden apartment. And guys thought the floor was spongy when they went in. And there were actually 9 mattresses all over the floor. There was about 12 people in a 2-bedroom apartment. And that was the game. And we got out of that with no fatalities, fortunately. But that was because I believe the Lord was the incident commander, looking over my shoulder instead of me. But so there are a number of issues. So let's begin to summarize it. Chief Hall, so I want you to give me 1 or 2 things. If you're going to a garden apartment fire, what are some things you have to look out for? We covered a lot of the ground, but give me a couple of tips from your perspective as we summarize.
Well, the 2 things come to mind immediately. The first is the importance of having enough ladder company personnel with hooks. Stop pulling down ceilings, opening walls ahead of where you need to be, just to make sure that the fire hasn't traveled with the void spaces we discussed. And one thing that wasn't discussed that I found to be problematic were the use of the so-called yard hydrants, or private property hydrants on the property itself. Usually they were privately maintained and in very poor condition. And in my experience, I always preferred to lay my feeders from the street. At least we knew that those hydrants were workable and available. Yard hydrants were really a turnoff for me, and I went to more than one job where we laid right by a couple of yard hydrants, but we knew we had a reliable water supply. Just my 2 cents.
No, thank you, Chief. That's good. That's good intelligence. I have I think Charlie would know, and I think John knows. I could look out the window and I witnessed a fire. I've got some great visuals of a fire across the street, which did involve yard hydrants, and it didn't go well. I guess I would say I didn't have to use a flash because there was enough light for everyone. So. Good point about the water supply, understanding, and Charlie, you're leading to another point there that, if you can do it, the fire departments that run EMS have an advantage in some cases because they're in this building picking up grandma and grandpa and whatever, and they're in these buildings. If you can do a pre-plan, if you can do a walkthrough, or if you're on a medical call assisting with an engine company or what have you, take a look around and see see how the place is laid out. I think it's invaluable. I think it helps. Chief Pernesti, couple things. Tell me some summary points here, and tell the folks where they can find you on social media.
Real quick, I found a valuable lesson. Modern fire attack, or call it. On a garden apartment, it's a little different than a residential. Top floor fire in a garden apartment, and for a quick knockdown, a transitional attack. By the time that the fellas got upstairs, they were surprised, and I was, of how quick the fire reset. In a residential house, that if you knock it quick, ways to go up the interior stairs and get into that apartment, it's going to reset very, or you think you have it knocked. Be a little quicker, I think, as far as resetting and getting ready to get in, and I learned that valuable lesson, trying to utilize a modern tactic, or not a done years ago surprised me. It's not going to deter me, but just one little lesson that you gotta hit it from the outside on a third floor screws to get up a garden apartment's interior stairs to that and finish it off, and it itself by the time they did that.
Yeah, well, travel time, reflex time, and deployment time are all something that you gotta take in mind. Chief, where can we find you on social media if somebody's got questions?
I'm on Twitter at EFD Chief 3. I do a lot for Fire Training Toolbox Facebook page, size ups, videos and such that I do for that site. You can contact me on my email, efdchief3@outlook.com. Appreciate it.
All right, thanks, Chief. Chief Stance, quick couple of summary points if you got something for the group.
Well, Chief, I would defer to my friend Dr. Wright, who has probably the most 4-story apartment buildings I've ever seen. And of course, his fire loading is different than ours. Mostly everything that sticks out is concrete. But his priority every time he goes to one of those is on that stairwell. He will make sure that he owns a stairwell. He'll isolate that fire away from that stairwell and make that stairwell as safe for the victims in that building as he can. So I think he has a good strategy.
Yeah. And so for those that don't know, Dr. Reich is in Germany. One of the premier folks using fire curtains, invented the fire curtains really, and I'm not sure he invented them, but got he did. So the reference to Dr. Reich is a German, and but holding a stairway, you know what, my friends in Canada, my friends in the US, holding a stairway is never a bad idea by any stretch of the imagination. If you're looking for Joe, you can find him on killtheflashover.com. He's on social media and in a lot of places. So Chief Cagno, quick summary statements.
Explore other options for especially, these things go to the roof. Trench cut's always a good option to stop horizontal spread in the cock loft. Another thing for quick line deployment is, take up your bundles or do outside stretches, drop a rope to bring a line up quick. And most importantly is get in these buildings and know how to access them, where the quickest routes are to the upper floors. Do all stairways lead to the upper floors, or are they separate?
Yeah, sometimes Chief Cagno and I talked today about terraced buildings, these buildings that kind of step up, and you may think you can get where you want to go, but you may not be in the right building or the right section of the building to get where you want to go. Chief Whitley, what have you got to put and Chief Cagno, we can find you on Twitter, on Facebook, and as the author of Lead It. So Warren, what do you got?
Call for help early. If you have anything showing on one of these, a second alarm is pretty prudent, because they can get away from you very quickly. And also pay attention to what openings have been made by residents as they leave. Were the windows open? Did they leave doors open? And I'll reiterate, own the stairway.
Yeah, no, that's great stuff. Just simple rules. When we're talking about this, I was taught something many years ago. If you pull up and you have a known life hazard, then you call for additional resources right then and there. If the first alarm assignment is committed to rescue, then you need additional alarms and figure out how long it's going to take for them to get there and so on and so forth. So resources early, quickly. Anticipate EMS needs, and think about it from there. So thank you everybody on the panel. Certainly thanks for the listeners that were there. Ken says thanks. Ethan's out there. So lots of folks sharing with us tonight. We will be back next week, and then we'll be off for a bit of a holiday break. So feel free to join us next week, Sunday, 8 p.m. Eastern time. Thank you, everyone.